Today on The Conservative Rebel, despite his campaign promises of America first and no new wars, Donald Trump just decided to put America last by starting a full-on regime change war with Iran. We'll discuss why this is clearly not in America's best interests, the glaring problems with the official rationale behind it, and why everyone who claims to be America first should be against it. Also, the Save America Act, which would require photo ID and proof of citizenship to vote, is one of the single most common sense bills ever proposed in American history. So naturally, the Democrats are doing everything they can to stop it. According to them, it will take away the voting rights of millions of Americans. I'll explain why. If true, that's actually a great thing, and all the more reason to support the law. You're listening to The Conservative Rebel. As you know, on Saturday, Donald Trump decided to start a regional war in the Middle East with a U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran, and is now openly stating that the objective of this is not to take out their nuclear capabilities so much as it is to completely change the Iranian regime, to engage in a George Bush-style, Iraq War-style regime change operation. Trump did this in defiance of the Constitution, which clearly requires congressional authorization for any war, much less a war that could take so much time and cost so much money. He did this against the will of both his own base and, more broadly, the bipartisan supermajority of American voters who oppose war with Iran. He did this in direct violation of his clear campaign promise of no new wars, and most importantly, he did this despite his own professed principle of America First, the principle he ran on and was elected on. In short, Trump chose to betray his base and betray the MAGA movement. I know that's a very unpopular thing to say out loud on some segments of the American right, but it happens to be true. And by saying it, I'm not being disloyal to the conservative movement or to the president. I'm being loyal to the America First principles Trump ran on and was elected on. When those principles are under attack, whether from the Democrats or from anyone else, I will defend them. Because they're my principles too. And make no mistake, this Iran war is a direct attack on those principles. This isn't a couple of bombs being dropped here and there. This isn't like a little missile barrage. This is a full-scale regime change war at the behest of a foreign country for the interests of that foreign country, not for the interests of America. Trump has chosen to subordinate the interests of the United States to the interests of Israel, a tiny foreign country thousands of miles from our shores. That might sound harsh, but I'm sorry, that's clearly what this was. Israel clearly benefits from this war. No one's denying that. Iran is a threat to their interests and a threat to their security in the region. But Donald Trump is not the Prime Minister of Israel. His job isn't to protect Israel's interests or any foreign country's interests, because the people of Israel didn't elect him. The people of America did. Donald Trump is the President of the United States, voted for by the people of the United States to advocate for them and to represent their interests, no one else's. There can be no dual loyalty here. You cannot work for two nations at once, because inevitably, sometimes those nations' interests will come into conflict. This is one of those cases. And when their interests come into conflict, you have to decide which nation gets prioritized. Trump made his decision clear on Saturday. But that doesn't change the fact that Trump, as the elected American president, is supposed to work for Americans. That means his one and his only moral responsibility is to Americans. He owes nothing to any other nation at all. That means, in order for this war to be remotely justified or legitimate, Donald Trump must be able to explain how a regime change war against a country that has not attacked us and poses no real threat to America is necessary to defend America and its interests. And beyond Trump, anyone in general who claims to be America first but supports this war must be able to explain in detail not how this war benefits Israel, or how this war benefits the Iranian people, or how this war sends a message to Russia, or whatever else you want to claim, but how this war benefits Americans. Pointing out that Iran is a brutal regime that kills thousands of its people, like dozens of other regimes around the world, won't cut it. There are so many evil regimes, there's so much bloodshed, suffering, persecution, and tyranny globally, and all of it is tragic. But there always have been, and there always will be such suffering, such tyranny, and such bloodshed all over the world. And a lot of it happens to us far closer than when it happens in Iran. But even if that wasn't the case, going to war with Iran still wouldn't benefit Americans in any way. It might benefit the Iranian people, but that's not the conversation we're having. We're talking about America and America's interests. Also, claiming Iran is weeks away from having a nuclear weapon, like people have been claiming for decades, also won't do it. Maybe you could argue that would justify bombing their nuclear facilities, like we did in June, after Trump was convinced to back off from full-on regime change and instead just opted to destroy their nuclear sites. You know, a couple months ago when the government told us that we had completely eliminated Iran's capacity to produce nuclear weapons? That argument still wouldn't convince me, but that's an argument you could actually make. But even if that argument worked, it wouldn't justify a regime change war, because that goes far beyond destroying nuclear sites, and a regime change war is explicitly what this is. This is overthrowing a long-standing government, replacing it with a new one, and socially engineering a nation of Arab Muslims to become good, freedom-loving Westerners who love democracy and feminism and gay marriage and human rights or whatever. And every time we've tried doing that, because we have tried doing this before to Islamic nations in the Middle East, guess what? It's turned out to be a total disaster. Look at Iraq. Look at the dead Americans, the dead civilians, the trillions of dollars wasted. History repeats itself. Insanity has often been defined as trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I've seen people make the argument that actually, normal people who don't want to start stupid wars for foreign countries are the ones who have the explaining to do. We're the ones who have to explain why it's not in America's interests for the radical Iranian regime to fall. But we're not saying that it's against America's interests for Iran's regime to fall. If we could snap our fingers and make it happen magically, then we'd do it. We're not crying any tears for Iran. No one's doing that outside of, the far left and some radical Muslims. We're not saying that it's against America's interests for Iran's regime to fall. We're saying it's against America's interests to go to war to make that happen. We're objecting to spending American tax dollars and American lives, more importantly, to starting a war to reconstruct a Muslim country half a world away from our shores. We're saying the costs outweigh the benefits by a lot. Maybe you disagree, but the burden of proof is on you if you claim to be America first and also support this war. And let's be real, most of the war's supporters are claiming nonetheless to be America first. So anyone who supports the war and says, I'm America first, must have a good answer to a very simple question. In what specific, measurable way will spending American blood and treasure in another unnecessary Middle Eastern war make the lives of everyday Americans better? In what way? I think we all know that the architects of this war, as usual, do not have a good answer to that question. But Iran and its proxies threaten U.S. security interests in the region, and you're not accounting for the geopolitical significance of the message this sends to Russia. And furthermore, if you as an ordinary American were to come up with a list of the problems that you're faced with in your day-to-day life, would Iran and its proxies make the top 100? Would they make the top 1,000? Would you even think to write that down in a list of your problems? Iran and its proxies. Or would your list look more like, I can't afford groceries. I can't afford to buy a home. I'm struggling under a mountain of debt. I can't get the job I want because I'm a white straight man, so no one wants to hire me. My community has become unrecognizable, unsafe, and un-American because of mass migration. The city I work in is becoming an open-air drug market, and I can't ride the subway or walk through my own city at night without worrying some schizophrenic meth head will come slit my throat. Would things like that be higher on your list than Iran and its proxies? Can anyone point to a single problem that everyday Americans actually encounter in their day-to-day lives and say, you know what's causing that problem? The Iranian regime. If only we started a war with Iran, then this problem would go away. Gee, if only the crown prince became Shah of Iran, then I could afford groceries. Then I wouldn't have to worry about getting stabbed to death on the subway. Can you think of a single example like that? Something tells me you can. The fact that we're worried about bringing freedom to the Middle East, while a single square inch of any American city is controlled by criminals and foreign drug cartels, is an abomination. The fact that we're going to spend billions, or if this goes like Iraq, trillions of dollars on making Iran better when Americans are struggling to put food on the table is likewise. The fact that we're worried about solving Israel's foreign policy problems while we have so many problems of our own is infuriating, to say the least of it. And this frustration is exactly what gave rise to Trump's movement in 2016. This frustration is, at least in part, what carried him to the White House in 2024. From putting foreign countries above America to putting third world immigrants above Americans, voters are fed up with their country and their people being put last. And if the Republican Party wants to stop the Democrats from seizing back power and plunging our country into a third world dystopia, that's a reality we would all do well to remember. All right, moving away from Iran to issues the American government should actually be focused on. As you know, the Save America Act, which would require photo ID and proof of citizenship to vote, just passed the House like a week or two ago and is currently making its way through the Senate. The bill has one simple purpose: to reduce voter fraud and make elections safer and more secure. Americans of goodwill who want free and secure elections that are decided by Americans, not fraudsters and illegal aliens, all support this bill. According to a recent study from the liberal Pew Research Center, 83% of U.S. adults and over 70% of even Democrats support requiring a photo ID to vote. So the Save America Act, in short, is one of the single most popular, obviously necessary, clearly justified, common sense bills that has ever been advanced through Congress. But the Democrats, who oppose necessary and common sense solutions to any problem in principle, almost unanimously voted against it in the House. In fact, they had just one defection of hundreds of Democrats in there, over 200 Democrats in there. Fortunately, we have a majority just large enough to overcome them and pass it in the House, and the bill is now in the Senate, where Lisa Murkowski, who claims to be a Republican, and potentially Mitch McConnell and maybe Susan Collins, who also are still pretending to be Republicans, will likely vote against it. All these people who like to pretend to be sensible moderates are in reality far more insane and left-wing on this particular issue than 70% of Democrat voters. So both open Democrats and closeted Democrats who pretend to be Republicans, like Murkowski, are aligned against this in the U.S. government. They could very well block it from passing the Senate, or filibuster so long that it takes weeks to get through. And the reason they're so adamantly against requiring an ID to vote, requiring you to prove you're not a criminal alien to vote, isn't because they have any genuine or legitimate concerns about that. The same Democrats who require 2 forms of ID to shovel snow in Mamdani's New York City have no honest objection to putting even less strict requirements on voting. You've likely heard many of the excuses the Democrats have cooked up and why they're stupid. What you might not have heard is just how self-contradictory and illogical the arguments these people make are. For example, the Center for American Progress, a leftist policy research center, presents the case against the Save America Act in 2 ways. Two ways in 2 sentences. First, it claims, quote, the requirement to present documents proving citizenship, such as a passport or birth certificate, to register to vote could block millions of Americans who do not have such documentation from casting a ballot. Yes, millions of Americans, according to this foundation, cannot provide an ID to vote. Millions of Americans, their words, not mine, are potentially committing election fraud. But then, literally in the very next sentence, the article says, quote, it is critical to note that federal law already clearly states that it is illegal for non-U.S. citizens to register to vote or cast a ballot in federal elections. It's an existing crime that is prosecuted in the very rare instances it happens, and is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. So, stopping non-citizens from voting, according to the left, would disenfranchise millions even though non-citizens never vote. This law, we're supposed to believe, would stop millions of people from voting, while also not stopping a single person from voting. It's an authoritarian, fascist, anti-democratic power grab that also does nothing, changes nothing, and will have no effect on anything at all. The Save America Act is so sinister, they believe, apparently, that it erodes not only our Constitution and civil laws, but it also erodes the very laws of logic themselves. Orange Hitler will not be bound by any law, not even the law of non-contradiction, which is how he can take away millions of people's voting rights while also not taking away a single person's voting rights. This is the level of logical argument the opponents of election security can muster. They literally can't go 2 sentences without contradicting themselves, and they're too stupid to even realize it. Either the law will disenfranchise millions, or it won't. If it won't, if it's just a redundant piece of legislation, then the Democrats have no reason to oppose it and no reason to claim it's an attack on our democracy, quote unquote. It could do no possible harm in that case, and could even do some good by reinforcing the older law. But let's say the bill would disenfranchise millions of people. Let's say it would result in far fewer people voting. Let's say it would silence millions of, quote, voices, as the left obnoxiously calls them. In that case, that's all the more reason to support it. If millions of people are voting in our elections who do not have an ID and cannot provide any evidence at all that they're even citizens of this country, we are facing an existential threat to the integrity of our republic. In that case, we need to double down and get this law passed as soon as possible. How many of these millions of voices are illegal aliens? We have no way of knowing, apparently, because we're just not checking. But if even a fraction of them are illegal aliens, that's enough to make or unmake a president. Just thousands of votes can do that in a couple swing states. I really can't wrap my mind around how this is supposed to be a persuasive argument against the Save America Act. But, the left will say, non-citizens aren't voting. It's a conspiracy theory to say that they are. These are all just Americans who are so stupid that they somehow can't figure out how to get any form of ID. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, they're right about that. They're obviously lying, but let's assume they're right, and only real, actual Americans who have citizenship will lose the right to vote from this law. Good. Pass it anyway. If you are too stupid to figure out how to get any form of ID as a grown adult, then I frankly don't care if you're a citizen whose ancestors have been here for centuries. You're unfit to vote, and you should lose the right to do so. As the Democrats know full well, you need ID to open a bank account, to get a job, to legally drive a car, to fly on a plane, to check into most hotels, and do about 1,000 other things all functional adults with any sort of life or career have to do. You have to show an ID to buy a beer, to own a gun, to own a home. There's lots of other things on top of the necessary stuff as well. If you cannot get an ID to vote, then you must, in every case, be a homeless, unemployed hobo without a credit card, without a bank account, without a career, and without the ability to drive yourself anywhere or travel anywhere. Because if you can do any of those things legally, then you must have an ID. If you do not do any of those things as a grown adult, if you don't have any job or career and never have, and the only reason that you're still living in this country is because you sponge off of the tax dollars of other people, in short, if you're so stupid that you can't figure out how to get an ID and prove your citizenship, then in every case, you're a lazy, dysfunctional, unproductive, incompetent drain on society. You should not get to pick the leader of the free world. You should not get to vote yourself more of my money or more of anyone else's money that is stolen from us by the government. You should not be allowed to do any of that. If the Save America Act purges all the laziest, stupidest, most entitled bums in the country from our voter rolls by the millions, then that's not a downside, but a huge generational victory we should all celebrate. It will dramatically improve the IQ and the quality of our elections and the quality of our politicians. So none of the objections to this bill make any sense. All it does is make sure foreign criminals who are living in this country illegally do not get to dictate to us how our country will be governed. So why do Democrats oppose it? How could anyone possibly oppose it? Well, the Democrats revealed their reason during Trump's State of the Union address. As you know, Trump asked every congressman who agreed that the American government should put Americans before illegal aliens to stand up to show that they agreed with that. And 0 Democrats did. They all openly admitted on camera before the entire country that they believe illegal aliens should be given equal or greater priority than the actual Americans these absolute frauds scammed into electing them and fraudulently claim to represent. They want to treat American citizens as second-class citizens while treating foreign non-citizens as the first-class citizens. They want the foreigners deciding our elections who are here illegally. That's why they oppose this bill. They view foreigners as more important than Americans, especially the dreaded, evil, racist white Americans. And if those foreigners just so happen to nearly unanimously vote for the Democrats, then that's a great bonus, too. That's a nice cherry on top. That's probably actually the real reason they support this. These people aren't even pretending to represent American voters at all at this point. They're openly admitting to putting foreigners first and Americans last. They hate America, they hate Americans, and they want to replace them and silence them in their own country by flooding the voter rolls with foreigners. That's what this is really about. So instead of worrying about the problems in the Middle East, the problems of Israel, the problems of Iran, Republicans should be worried about the cultural war here at home. And blocking the passage of this common-sense legislation, this common-sense election security measure, is an integral part of the Democrats' strategy to win that war. That's why Republicans need to stop cheering, stop waving their pom-poms about the latest catastrophe in the Middle East, and focus on what actually matters, what will actually help save this country, which is to pass this common-sense law and stop the Democrats from taking power again. Thanks for listening to today's episode of The Conservative Rebel. If you liked it, please leave a rating on your podcast app, share it with anyone you think might like it, give it a follow. I'll see you next time.